3/4 from Heaven, Chapter 1 The Ritual. When I arrived at George's house, I knew what to expect. He said he had to show me something that was urgent. He had said that looking for the pesky ant hill that was nested somewhere in his rock field, he had found something. Something or some things. More than one. Well, of course, you don't even know what these things are. I'll tell you, or you will soon find out. So I took my time reaching George's house. I thought it was just a silver dollar or some petrified wood. He was always making a big deal out of nothing. George's house loomed before me like a shining beacon of darkness. I got the shivers. Why? It was just George's house. I had come here to play poker every evening with Joe, too. Joe was not told of this new finding. George has told me that Joe panics in times like these. Joe was currently at the firing range, anyway. Panics? Of what? I knocked on the door with a shivering hand. Just a silver dollar, or a fossil, or. The door flung open, revealing a very puzzled yet excited Georges. Thank God, Jim. Come, come. Georges pulled me out from the doorstep and into the comfort of his home. He led me into the kitchen, into his breakfast table. On the table were 3 stones, ordinary-looking stones. They sported the shiny gloss of some kind of red paint. Very pearly, I might add. Wow, did my face look red. Just stones, rocks, from his rock yard. I had been trembling a few minutes ago for no reason. Look, Jim, these are very important gifts from my own yard. Look, look, Georges said, pointing at the 3 painted rocks. Georges, did you perhaps have a little too much to drink last night? I said. No, these are portals, Jim. I found them in my yard yesterday. I must have put them too close together because just look. Georges ran to the table and picked up one of the rocks, which he placed next to the middle one. Then he took the other stone from the other end of the table and set it with the others. Georges looked back at me and smiled. Then he pulled out a seat for me to take. I nervously took it and sat down beside him at the table. Now, look carefully, Georges said. Immediately after he said this, the stones started rattling and shaking. Electricity sprouted out of the stones and cracking light. Georges, what are you doing? Just hold on, Jim. We're in for a ride. Now the stones glowed and they became eyes. Big, yellow, glowing eyes until the eyes morphed together, making a bright circle of yellow light, and Georges and I were gone. Chapter 2 Land Without Time. I was out of my seat. I was up in the air. Georges was in front of me, laughing and whooping. He fell into the large circle of light. The light was becoming brighter and bigger until Georges was flung into it. His body became smaller and smaller before me. George's hair whipped behind him. His whooping was no longer audible. I grabbed onto the chair, fingers slipping away. The light engulfed me. Now I was twisting and flying around. I couldn't even hear myself scream. The light was twirling and spiraling around my flipping body. The light now turned red and then blue, baby blue, that soon turned to dark blue. My arms shook and flapped around me like running hoses. My legs were locked outward like steel poles. I closed my eyes, tears billowing away from my cheeks. The air now felt like ice, and the dark blue light was gone. Now I was falling down, and then I hit something hard. I still kept my eyes closed, though, and I could feel the tears coursing down my cheeks. This must be heaven, I thought. I died in that horrible portal. Jim, are you crying? Then I heard laughter. Come on, get up. No, you're not dead. That's what I first thought, too. I opened my eyes, squinting past the tears. There was Georges smiling down on me, dirt plastered on his face. He gave me his hand and helped me up. This is when I got to see this new world. The sky above us was orange. There was a sun, but it was green. There were also 2 moons circling around it very fast. The ground I was standing on was soiled with red weeds growing out, which had gnarly thorns that poked out of the leaves. Off in the distance was a large building that looked like a hangar. A loud humming noise emanated from it. So, how do you like it? Georges asked. What the hell is this place? I responded. This is Earth, Georges said. Well, like I say, Earth's shadowed world. This is actually a world? A planet? Not a planet. You could search space for thousands of years and you wouldn't find it. This world is only going to be found with those portal keys, Georges explained. Is there life here? I asked, looking around. Georges only smiled. Come on, we'll miss our flight. He turned and ran towards the hangar. He looked back to beckon me on. All I could do was follow him, not knowing what I was getting myself into. Chapter 3 Heaven's Demons. So I trudged through the unknown land, kicking the weeds around in the soil, which resembled purple vines. On my fall out of the portal, which had just closed up behind us, I had fallen on one of those red weeds. So an unnoticed thorn was sticking straight out of my jeans. I didn't care, though. This world was too much for me to take in all at once. The hangar loomed ahead of us. A steel antenna protruded from the rooftop, erupting with beautiful strikes of electricity. I was astounded and interested. I didn't know what to think. Dreaming kept popping into the midst of my mind. The front of the hangar was inscribed with the language, Dorft Landsky. Here comes our ride, Georgia said excitedly. I looked up, and I ended up doing a double take. A huge flying contraption came into view, which looked like a Wright brothers design. It had two long, heavy wings protruding out of it. There was also a huge propeller on the bottom and on top. Just like the hangar, the contraption had an antenna coming out of the nose. Electricity cracked from the rod. The contraption stopped abruptly, directly above the hangar, and a rope rolled out from the door on the base. Here are the shadow humans, Georgia said, pointing at the rope. Many humans slid out from the door on the rope until they were on the landing pad. One by one, they slid down until the shadow plane was empty and the pad was full. Those look like ordinary humans to me, I said. And they did. They wore suits and t-shirts, except for the women who wore sundresses or tank tops. Come on, Georgia said. Georges led me to the entrance of the hangar, and the crowd was just leaving. That's when I got a glimpse of one of the males. It didn't look human at all. It had gray-colored skin with several strands of hair covering his face. Its eyes were yellow and complete with cat-like pupils. Its upper and lower jaws jutted outwards, like an ape, showing off the lining of huge teeth through its purple lips. It had a nose, but it was only a small bump with nostrils. The shadow man looked over at me, then tipped its hat, which looked moth-eaten and even sunstroked. "What was that?" I asked, bewildered. A native. Georges pulled me away from the approaching crowd and into the open archway of the hangar. No doors? I thought. Inside the hangar was a huge dome-shaped room, marked with small booths and swarms of shadow people. Georges and I passed a couple who were kissing with snake-like tongues. A kid with a baseball cap which read, "How about them Klebold Swats?" looked up at me, then held on to his mom fearfully. A man carrying a briefcase looked at Georges and hissed warningly. A gray-skinned older man in a wheelchair looked at me with mixed expressions. Its lamp-like eyes blinked at me, dubiously. Georges and I stopped at an open booth. A young shadow woman with chestnut hair looked up at us perplexed. Her eyes even watered. "Two, please," Georges said, leaning on the front of the booth. The booth was littered with stickers saying, "Baggage is left at Area GP," and "Zleefolt isn't just a city in Bardit." While the woman was typing on something that looked like a toaster with keys, I asked Georges what Zleefolt was. "I asked that myself. That's their currency," Georges said. "These rides are free, but tipping is customary." The woman smashed a huge stamp onto two pieces of wood and handed them to Georges. Georges handed me one, which read, "Dorft Landsky, Arena 7U5, Tritus Capton, Destination." "Where are you fondlings from?" the woman asked, showing sharp yellow teeth. I shuddered at this. "You must be from Slunder. Haven't been there myself, but I heard that place is like a whole nother planet." She chuckled, which caused her long tongue to flop away from her purple lips. "Yep, home sweet Slunder," Georgia said, pushing me away. "Slunder's our home sweet home." As we turned, the lady looked at us with bared teeth. Chapter 4. The Miracle City. "We have to watch out for these people," Georgia said, guiding me through an unlit tunnel marked arena. "Some are overprotective of their race. When they see someone not like them, they might become hostile." "Hostile?" I asked, looking at an overweight man eating a pastry. "Well, I was riding on one of those Landsky when a teenager attacked me. The security officers had to pull him off." Georges approached a man behind a pulpit and handed him his wooden ticket. The man looked at them fearfully for a second and then took Georges. I did the same, and his rat-like claw scraped across my hand for a second. I shuddered again, which made the man draw back with fear. His five-fingered claw brushed back and forth through the air, indicating that it was safe to move on. Georges grabbed me by the arm and through a door, and at the end of the hallway dangled a thick piece of metal rope. It was marked with finger grooves for easy climbing. I looked up at the hovering Landsky with enthusiasm. Georges grabbed onto the rope and was already starting to climb, his legs wrapped around it. I was shoved from behind, which almost made me fall from the tunnel and onto the platform 50 feet below. "Get a move on, Askrel," said an old man with two strands of hair dangling from his freckled scalp. I immediately jumped for the rope and started my climb, that angry man following suit. He looked up at me and snarled. Then he smiled. I lost grip of the rope and soon found myself falling away. My legs, which were wrapped around the rope, slipped. I yelled out frantically, but the angry man grabbed me by the collar of my shirt as I fell, nearly choking me in the process. He lifted me up with amazing strength so that I could grab onto the rope, which I did reluctantly. "Watch out there, Askrel, you almost made a hedge smutter there," he laughed. People behind me laughed, and so did the people in the tunnel. I smiled nervously and climbed quickly up to where the worried Georges was hanging. "You okay?" he asked. "As good as I could feel right now." Right when the teenager was pulled off of me, the security officer stabbed him, Georges explained. We were sitting on 2 uncomfortable metal chairs lined up very closely. I was cramped up against a very disgruntled man reading a newspaper stamped on a large piece of bark. He kept shooting me very distressed looks. In order to hear Georges, I leaned in incredibly close because there was such a loud humming noise emanating from the walls of the aircraft. His blood squirted everywhere. His eyes literally poked out of his head, Georges said darkly. They scooped him up and threw him straight off the plane. "The penalty for any crime is instant death?" I asked. "Sadly, yes," Georges said, looking out of the dirt-pasted, book-sized window. We didn't speak the rest of the ride. Up ahead, the city called Dreer was coming into focus. From the window, I watched it approach thoughtfully. Georges was looking at the same thing. He still hadn't said a word. The skyscrapers tilted off the sloping hills like mirror images. It was beautiful, and I felt a longing for it. A small part of my heart felt as if I were home again. Chapter 5. Back Home. Suddenly a huge lurch erupted across the land sky, and I jumped out of my seat. The man next to me groaned and got up, tucking away the newspaper. The land sky tilted downwards and dropped like a stone. I screamed, grasping onto my cold metal chair. Georges got up, rolling his eyes as the machine corrected itself, and stopped abruptly. I looked around as everyone came for the now open hatchway. The rope was unraveled by a blue-suited man, who would then help the other natives, with a bright smile full of yellow teeth. Georges beckoned me, and I slowly got out of my chair. I was embarrassed because the people were looking over their shoulders at me, snickering. I got up to face Georges, my face red as a tomato. "So what's in Dreer?" I asked. "Dreer is like New York City for us," Georges explained. "Everything is here." Now the crowd was gone, and Georges stepped up to the blue-suited man. The man didn't stop smiling, though, and he carefully helped Georges onto the metal rope. Now it was my turn. I remained rooted to the floor, fearful of those sharp, rough claws touching me. I started to shake with fear. My breath bated. The man's eyes bore into me, long bushy hair swinging in front of his rubber-like skin. The man's smile faded and his eyes became glassy and suspicious. "Sir?" the man said simply. He held out his pale claw. I screamed in fear and dodged away from the creature. I jumped downwards, out of the hatch, my legs wrapping around the rope, my hands burning under the friction. My heart was pounding. I couldn't help but feel like the man was climbing the rope right behind me, his knife poised to murder me like the teenager. In an instant, I was standing on the platform next to the smiling Georges. I let go of the rope and turned, ready for the slice of the blade. Nothing. The rope was quickly pulled up and the land sky was gone. I was relieved, but still did not feel safe. "Come on, Jim, there's a lot to see," Georges said, running into the tunnel, extending into the land sky hangar. I followed, feeling the cat eyes burning into the back of my head, which only made me sprint faster. We pulled ourselves out of the roaring crowd of shadow people. This land sky hangar was of the same design as the other, but only built on a crowded city corner where the creatures were running down dirt paths with 2 lanes, just like a highway. There were no cars here, so the shadow people made it to their next destination by running down these well-worn paths. Shops and very large skyscrapers lined the sides of the streets, all humming with electricity from the familiar antennas that stuck out of the rooftops. Georges explained that this was to power the lights and the toaster-like computers that were used in the land sky hangar. The city was absolutely marvelous. Kids ran from candy shops, giggling, large apple-sized chocolate-covered cherries in their claws. Banners advertising businesses hung from metal pegs. One read, "If life's got you in the gutter, use TOSPA." It showed a picture of a shadow man sticking an electrified pin up his nose. Georges saw my puzzled face and quickly explained, "In this Earth, they believe if something isn't going right, suicide is the answer." "TOSPA is a suicide device?" I asked shockingly. Georges pulled me roughly, dragging me into the sea of outgoing people. The dirt path was dusty and littered with these red weeds, so we both stepped carefully. On our way down the street, we passed a briefcase store, a bookstore, a suit manufacturer, a police station, where men dressed in black guarded a large metal gate. There was a joke shop where long metal pipes shot confetti made of wood onto the street. The shadow people laughed distractedly at the confetti and they continued onward. And the restaurant on the street corner gave off a longing fragrance. I hadn't had anything to eat, so I was starting to walk toward it. Georges grabbed me by my dusty shirt and pulled me close to him. "We can't plan on anything at this point, Jim. We're about to leave," he said. "We can only stay here an hour at a time, and it's almost up." "Oh," I said. My stomach growled, and I wondered what such a wonderful smell could be attached to. You don't want to eat here anyway, Georges explained. The executed shadow people are cooked up and served in that restaurant. I gasped. They're cannibals? I shouted. All the shadow beings looked back at the two of us, their eyes wide, their pearly teeth sharp and bared. Even the children looked angry, their black nails pointing crazily downwards, as if ready to lash out at us. A man holding a large broom and wearing stained overalls stepped forward, his left bare foot crunching down upon a red weed. He didn't even flinch as a thorn drove right into his palm. "What did you say, you barded askel?" the shadow thing asked, his yellow eyes narrowing into slits. "Cannibals? Is that it, you pitiful martyr?" I backed away, my lips quivering. Georges held his ground, though, but he looked just as horrified. I backed up into a woman who pushed me forward and hissed. Her right hand's pinky and index finger were pressed onto her left shoulder, as if warding me off. I looked back over at the janitor, who was making the same sign on his shoulder. Many of the other shadow people were starting to mimic the woman. Suddenly I was swept off my feet as someone from behind grabbed onto my shoulders and pulled. I hit the ground hard and the janitor fell on me, long serpent tongue lolling, saliva dripping onto my forehead. Georges was also pinned down by the woman, who was sniffing at George's blowing blonde hair. The janitor grabbed my chin with his gnarly fingernails, which pinched into my flesh. I screamed, my body rigid as a board. The janitor opened his mouth, which gave off a rotting smell. The teeth even seemed like they were growing longer and dangerously sharper. Then my eyes caught George's, who was glowing an orange color, then yellow, then red. The woman jumped off of him with great agility, her hands burning and bloody. So were her exposed knees. There was a sudden flash of blue light and George's was gone. The shadow creatures looked around curiously until all their eyes rested on the janitor. My sight turned red as I saw the janitor screeching out in pain. He jumped off of my glowing body, which now had turned purple. I was rocking up and down like a rocking horse. My teeth were chattering. I was slowly disappearing. My body suddenly relaxed, and a series of blue flashes engulfed me. My body was gone now, the shadow janitor's painful yells and calls of curiosity fading away. I had slipped back into the same portal again, the colors changing with each turn in the ever-winding tunnel. This trip was much shorter than the last one, and in no time at all I was thrown forward into my kitchen chair, which shattered into pieces, letting my head smack onto the linoleum floor. I slipped into unconsciousness.